Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says the significance of the there is no data answer. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. Back in the year 2019 November, what was happening in China? There was a deadliest virus that had occurred. Initially, it was assumed that this was a localized virus which may not spread from one region to another. With time, this was called a lie and it started spreading from region to region. What was once endemic to a particular region started spreading from one country to other, from continent to continent, because of which there was a loss of lives as well. The economic activity came to a standstill. Why? Because this particular virus was spreading like a wildfire. As a result, governments across the countries came up to a particular policy initiative. What did they do? They came up with the lockdowns. This lockdowns was imposed in multiple countries basically to prevent the transmission. The lockdown was imposed in India as well in March 2020, and as a result we were able to cut down on the transmission and we were able to prevent the spread of the virus. After the first wave settled, there were multiple questions that were asked to the government. What were these questions? These questions was in reference to data. What is the data? Data is the information. Information of the numbers, information of the statistics. What is happening with respect to India when it comes to the COVID-19? There were multiple information points that was asked. One important factor that the government was questioned was in reference to the data of the migrant workers who were walking back to their villages. The government did not have the numbers. Then questions were asked after COVID-19 hit the country, how many people lost their jobs, what was the livelihood impact on the people, and what is the unemployment rate because of COVID-19. Again, the government said that we do not have the data, but according to World Bank, it concluded that about 40 million migrant workers were impacted, lost their jobs during this period. So what is the second major issue? The government did not have the data about the migrant workers who lost their jobs, moved from the urban areas back to the rural areas, the walking from the urban areas towards the rural areas, and the unemployment data was not available with the government. During the same period, we should thank all those doctors who put in their lives for our lives. We lost number of frontline health workers as well. The government was asked a question, what about the frontline health workers? How many healthline workers have passed away? The government did not have the data. What this means is that when there were some important questions asked about the numbers and statistics during this period, the government did not have the numbers and the statistics. Let's look at the other instance. We have one of the important surveys called as All India Household Consumer Expenditure Survey. As the very name denotes, it is about consumer spending on the goods and services. What exactly happens? Let's say for example, we have different sections of the society. One is the rural India, the other is the urban area. The priorities of the people in the urban areas are totally different from those of the rural areas. So what happens, according to this All India Household Consumer Expenditure Survey, a quinquennial survey is conducted, which is conducted every 5 years by the National Sample Survey Office. What does it do? It collects information from the people on what? One is on the goods, the other is on the services, one is respect to the food, the other is with respect to the non-food items. So this information is collected by the National Sample Survey Office basically to understand what are the priorities of the people, what is that the government is looking at, what is that the people are consuming. So once the government is able to get this data from this particular statistics, the government would be able to understand the growth factor and the consumer demand in the market as well. So basically, this All India Household Consumer Expenditure Survey will try and identify what are the key sectors in the economy where people are banking on. So this will give us an idea about the living standards. This will give us an idea about the growth range across multiple states in India. But what was happening during 2019 prior to the elections? Prior to the elections, ideally, the government should have released some of the data with respect to All India Household Consumer Expenditure Survey. The government should have released it. The government should have released where people are spending their money. So the data would be collected. This should have been released by the government. Even during that time the government did not reveal the data. So what we actually see, there is data absence. Let's take another example. After COVID-19, we had the second wave as well. During this transmission period, there were number of people who passed away because of manual scavenging. Manual scavenging is not permitted according to the laws of the country until and unless all precautionary measures are taken. But there are people who are still working as manual scavengers, losing their lives. Data was asked with respect to the government, and the government did not have the data, says the author. Then the oxygen concentrators were required. Oxygen supply was to be provided, but even in this case, unfortunately, in what could be an infelicitous situation, the government once again did not have the data. Then we speak about the farmers' agitation because of the farm bills. Number of farmers did pass away as well. Questions was asked by the opposition political parties. The government did not have the data. Then there were internet shutdowns in multiple states in India, across multiple states run by different governments as well, when opposition political parties and other political parties, in fact political scientists, question what happened to the economy, how is that their lives were impacted because of the internet shutdowns. Again, there was no data. Finally, vaccines were very important to mitigate the impact of this virus, but the government again did not have the vaccine data as well. All this clearly points out that we have absence of data about the critical things, critical infrastructure, critical policy making issues, and as a result, what is going to suffer? It is the governance which is going to suffer, says the author. Now the question is, what is the importance of data? Why data is important? Why do we require the numbers? What is the importance of statistics? When it comes to the government has multiple challenges. It has to run social welfare schemes, programs, so on and so forth. It has to identify which area does not have a relevant mechanism to fulfill this criteria. So what are the challenges in the society? The government will have to identify it. For it to come up with an action plan, what it requires is the data. Only when we have statistics, only when we have data, only when we have numbers, we would be able to come up with an objective criteria so that we can fulfill the challenges so that the outcome is achieved. But in the present situation, the challenges of the government can improve only when we have the data. When we have a coherent set of data, coherent set of ideas can come into picture, the instruments to achieve that particular objective can be there, and as a result, data is integral to the policy making. Only when we have the data, we would be able to come up with the policy making initiative. But unfortunately, in the present situation, because data was not collected by the government and it was not revealed on time, what is happening here? The governance is the major sufferer during this particular initiative. Also remember, we have two things that is into picture. One is what is called as output. The other is called as outcome when it comes to the policy making. Let me give you a simple example. So what is a simple example? We all know about Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. The government might say that there are about 1 lakh sanitation or the toilets that are constructed. This is the output. So the government is saying that there are about 1 lakh toilets that are constructed. This is the output. But what is the outcome? Are people using the toilets? Is water available in these toilets every now and then? Are people able to use these toilets? That is the outcome. So when it comes to the policy making initiatives, it is not only important that we showcase the desired output, but what matters to us is the outcome. Are people able to use these toilets? Are people able to bring change? Is people aware about the awareness of the issues of the sanitation? All this becomes the part of the outcome. So if we have to get the outcome in the society, what matters the most is the data, and in the present situation there is clear cut absence of data, or there is manipulation of data, says the author. In fact, if policy making initiative have to be successful, it has to benefit the people. What we require is data, statistics, and number. Only when we know these numbers, we would be able to look into a specific section of the society, a particular region in the society, so that we can bring all these changes that is present in the society. However, the author goes on to say that government at times may not reveal this data primarily because of three reasons. What are these three reasons? One is the scrutiny. What happens if data is revealed? You might have the journalists, you might have the political thinkers, you might also have the RTI activists who may dig into that data, whether the data is right or wrong. So what will they do? They'll start scrutinizing this particular data. They will put out the truth in front of the public. So what is happening here? There is scrutiny of the numbers. So what is happening here? Whether the outcome is achieved by the government is being expected. So as a result, when the data is given by the government, there is in-scale scrutiny of that particular project or the survey or that welfare scheme and program. So if the government has not met an outcome, it means it will come out in the public forum, and this ultimately means that they will be in a position where they will not be able to engage on the political mileage. This ultimately points out that if data is scrutinized and if they are not able to keep up to the expectations of the people, they are not able to meet the standards as expected by the people, and if these are revealed in the public forum, what was supposed to have been a successful narrative campaign will not work good, and as a result the government may have to go. We will have a new political party which may form the government as well. That is one point of view. Added to this, whenever the data is not released, what happens? There can be deflection of the accountability. What is this issue all about? This is just a situation. This is not about any political party whatsoever. This is just an example so that you would be able to understand this better. Let's say, for example, when it comes to India, we have the central government. We also have the different state governments as well. Ideally, if there are numbers that are present, you would be able to pinpoint it is the central government or the respective state governments who have done a blunder or a mistake. But what if the numbers and the data is not present? The central government would be able to blame the state governments. The state governments can say it is the problem of the central government. So what you will have is one party, one government putting the blame on the other. Ideally, they should have worked according to the 7th schedule, according to an item present in the 7th schedule. But because of the absence of data, numbers and statistics, each government blame another party, blame another government, and ultimately it is the governance which is bound to suffer. This is where the author voices out certain concerns with respect to the absence of data. When it comes to the government as well as the people and the democracy, we have the simplest definition: government of the people, government by the people, government for the people. But what is happening of late? Because there is no data, it has been a one-side approach where state has the maximum powers, but this is at the cost of accountability. Let me give you an example. Let's say the government wants to bring in transparency in the system. It wants to make sure that people go about paying the taxes. So what should the government do? The government will come up with the PAN card. It also wants to ensure that there is curbing when it comes to the ghost accounts for taking the subsidies. So what will the government do? The government comes up with the Aadhaar. It also ensures that there is fingerprint authentication. The government, in order to make sure that there is transparency in the system, people are paying their taxes, introduces all these schemes and programs. To keep a check on the security, the government may also come up with surveillance mechanisms as well. But when the government is coming up with all these transparency modules, there is also an expectation from the people towards the government as well. The government will also have to be transparent. The government will also have to showcase the data. That is when people would know whether the government has functioned or not, and they would be able to take out that particular party if it is not able to achieve desired outcomes. Which is why data becomes important. But in the present situation, because of no data, people would not be able to keep a check on the government, and ultimately democracy may fail, says the author. In order to overcome all these issues, what we require is statistical organizations. There is a requirement of statistical audit as well, so that all these institutions perform their duty, and ultimately it is placed in front of the parliament so that the legislature can keep the executive accountable. So kindly remember, when it comes to the data, it is most important. If there is no data, we would not be able to contribute to the development, and ultimately what what we will have is the weakening of the democratic institutions. So deficit in data also means that people would stop trusting these public institutions. They would not be able to trust these institutions, and at the same time, when people stop trusting these public institutions, this can also increase the civil unrest in the society, and ultimately this can also bring political instability as well. So it is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says keeping an eye on China's expanding nuclear stack. When it comes to China, China is one of the superpowers. We have United States of America. We also have Russia as well. When we speak about these two countries, they are known for one thing. What is it? These two countries have larger number of nuclear warheads. There was a time where these two countries competed with each other to have who will have the most number of nuclear warheads. And one of the countries which is competing right now with United States of America and Russia may not be as soon as possible, but they are looking forward, have a vision to ensure that there are as many nuclear heads as possible, or in fact relatively increase their nuclear warheads, and that happens to be China. So this article here is primarily looking at why is China increasing its nuclear missiles, what will be its impact at the global scale, and what impact it can have on India. First up, when we look into the People's Republic of China, what is it doing? It is expanding its nuclear arsenal. This has been acknowledged by United States of America and also by satellite images as well. So by building more missile nuclear silos in multiple regions in China, what China is doing is increasing its nuclear warheads. Now the question is, what is this missile silo? When we speak about missile silos, they are nothing but the underground vertical cylinders which contain the storage and the launching of the intercontinental ballistic design. So when it comes to China, we have number of examples where they are building these missile silos. One happens to be the Xinjiang region. So kindly remember, this is an image. So what you have is about 120 missile silos. So what are these silos? As I've just told you, these are nothing but underground vertical cylindrical container which stores and which would be used for launching of intercontinental ballistic missile. So what is it? It is nothing but a storage device where these missiles will be placed in it and they can be launched from this particular site. So the point that we have to understand is, why is China increasing the number of nuclear warheads? When it comes to China, it has a nuclear strategy which is based on two important pillars. The first important pillar is deterrence. What is deterrence? This shows that China has nuclear warheads, China has nuclear missiles, so other country will not launch, because in case they do launch, they will also have a comeback from China. So it is preventing another party to launch any type of nuclear missiles. So what is it acting as? It is deterring other countries from threatening China with nuclear coercion or blackmail. That's the first thing. The second thing is about the retaliation. If there is a country which goes on to retaliate against China, there is a first strike, let's say hypothetically from United States of America or from any other country. In such a case, China will retaliate such that these nuclear missiles will be hitting another country. So the first pillar of China is deterrence, which is why it has nuclear missiles. The other is retaliation. It is based on these two important pillars. Now when we look into the statistics from Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, it goes on to say that as of now, there are about 250 to 350 warheads, which is going to be increased, says the Stockholm International Peace Research Institutions. If we look into the missiles that are present with China, they have DF-4, DF-5A, DF-21, DF-26, DF-31, 31A, 31AG, DF-41. These are the intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they also have the range as well, and it can reach as much as 13,000 kilometers, and there are some whose targets are yet to be deciphered as well. These are the missiles which run both on liquid fuel as well as on solid fuel. Now the question is, why is China increasing its nuclear warheads and at the same time increasing the missile silos? There are multiple reasons to it. The first reason happens to be the decoy. What is this decoy? Let me give you an hypothetical situation. Let's say there are about 5 regions in China. Region 5. So this fourth region and the fifth region is where this nuclear warhead is present. This is where the nuclear missiles can be launched from this particular region and can hit another country. But what does China do? China showcases that region 1, 2 and 3 also has these nuclear warheads. So ideally it is only in 4 and 5 that this nuclear warheads is present, but China showcases that 1, 2, 3 regions might also have these nuclear warheads. So what would happen? Let's say there is one of the opposition parties, let's say USA in this particular case, a hypothetical situation. If it wants to launch the nuclear missiles, what will it do? It launch on this particular location 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth, assuming that there are nuclear warheads in this particular region. So what is it? China is convincing United States of America or any other country for that matter that this particular region has nuclear warheads. Ideally that is not present, but it is only in 4 and 5 where the nuclear warhead is present. So what is China doing here? It is making United States of America hit on these dummy targets which are not actually the nuclear warhead regions, and at the same time it would also know which is the country which is engaged in this operation and can hit back that country as the retaliatory attack. So why is China increasing the missile silos? Because it can act as a decoy where the nuclear operations may not have occurred, but it is showcasing to the world that there are nuclear operations, ensuring that an opposition country will immediately start off the operations so that China can take up the retaliatory action. Added to this, we have Russia. We also have United States of America, which have large number of nuclear warheads. This is a time where the countries of late have started accepting the other country on two important things. One is the technological control. The second is the defense control. When it comes to United States of America, it has large warheads, which is why other country accept the dominance of United States of America, which is why they also accept the dominance of Russia as well, because they have advanced technology when it comes to the nuclear calculus. In the present situation, if China has to showcase that it is one of the major defense powers across the world, it also has to increase its nuclear warheads as well. As a result, to give and hold a position in the geopolitics, China is also increasing its nuclear warheads. This is where the author goes on to say that in spite of reputation from United States of America, request from Russia, China is not ready to enter into the tripartite arms control negotiations. Why is China saying so? That is because it basically believes that it has to protect its sovereignty and integrity, and currently in the present situation, it has as many as 250 to 350 warheads, but Russia and United States of America have more than 1000, which is why China says that it does not want to enter into this tripartite arm control negotiation. And at the same time, we should also look at what could be the implications on India. Whenever you have a close door neighbor who is increasing the nuclear warhead spree, this can also put any other country in dilemma as well. If China goes on to increase these nuclear warheads, India can also replicate it. India may also enhance on the nuclear warheads. As of now, it is said that India has about 110 to more than that. But if China starts increasing, India may also start increasing its nuclear warheads. So what it means, the defense budget will also start increasing. This means that the amount of money in the overall GDP will also start increasing, and this means that the social sector like education, health and other important sector may also face a hit as well. But the author also goes on to say that since China is going on this particular track, we have to keep a constant upgradation. We also have to ensure that the other areas like the cyber, the electronics, the space weapons and multiple other segments will also have to be boosted as well. In case China does retaliate, we should have other means and mechanisms to retaliate as well, says the author. What is the conclusion that we can draw? Yes, China will increase its nuclear warheads. It may upscale its nuclear warheads as well. But India, during this particular period, will have to have a close eye on its neighbor and also work out different strategic options, says the author. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the police we need. There are IPS pass outs who come out of the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Police Academy. These probationer IPS police officers are given the best all-round IPS probationer and the sword of honor for the best outdoor probationer. What does this mean? There are a number of IPS probationers who go every year to the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Police Academy. After their ranking, they go to this in Hyderabad. They trained in this particular academy. They are taught the ethos, the values, and the other principles that the police will have to hold to. There are two things that they are judged on. One is about their intellectual capacity, which is about the studies. The other is on the practices. What are these practices? This will check how agile they are, how strong they are, how are they performing in the athletics. So when a person is being judged as an all-rounder, best outdoor probationer, there are two criteria that are fixed by the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Police Academy. The person who's awarded this certificate will have to be good overall when it comes to the studies in understanding the subject matter of law, and at the same time they also have to be really agile as well. So they have to be athletic in reform. If they are able to meet both these criteria, they would be declared as the best outdoor probationer. Why are we discussing this? That is because when we speak about the National Police Academy, this is the most important criteria. One is the study, the other is the practice where they have to be agile, so on and so forth. Apart from this, they are also taught how to be really good to people, how is that they have to conduct their activities, how can they sympathize, empathize, and have compassion towards the people in the society. So it is not just about agility, it is not just about the intellectual capacity, but it is more about courteous nature of the police personnel. But of late, there is declining levels of integrity, says the author. In spite of all of this being taught, the integrity, the probity, the honesty of the IPS officers is going down, says the author. This is where he takes into example number of cases. There was a recent case of alleged extortion that was registered against the former Mumbai police commissioner. There was also a sexual harassment case against a particular IPS officer where he had sexually harassed another female employee, and at the same time what we actually see, there are large number of cases where sexual harassment happens in the police station, where a female who is raped or sexually molested goes to the police station, FIR is not registered, crime continues to be high against the women. For all of this, it is the problem with the police, says the author. So the author here says that in spite of the treatment, in spite of the education, in spite of the principles that are given to the police officers, we continue to be haunted by the police machinery, says the author. So what does an average citizen want? When it comes to the average citizen, all that he expects is that there is a class in the society, the rich class as well as the poor class. The rich have everything at their disposal. They have the money power, they have the muscle power, they also have the political power as well. This is not present with respect to the poor. But when it comes to a clash of the rich and the poor, irrespective of who the person is, every person will have to be done justice. But what happens in this case? It is assumed and it is often said that police officers are in a close nexus with the political masters, businessmen, as well as the gang leaders as well. These are the allegations that are being made. So what is that people are looking for? That irrespective of whether it is rich or poor, equality will have to be ensured, and what needs to be done is all of these people will have to be treated alike. Apart from this, whenever they go to the police stations, their files will have to be taken up seriously, their issues will have to be taken up seriously, and this should be discharged without any payment of the bribe as well. That once again is not happening in the present situation, says the author. Apart from this, whenever there is a police officer who is to be appointed to a designated position, let's say the commissioner in the metropolitan city or the DIG or the IGP, so on and so forth, what matters the most is the integrity of that particular person, the skill, the brilliance, the intelligence, and how that particular officer is able to solve the crisis in the society. But what is happening in the situation right now? Most of these people who are selected to such designated positions do not have the intelligence. They might have not solved cases, but in this case, all that works is the political clout. In case they have links, they have shown loyal to a particular party. If that party comes into picture, they would be selected as the commissioner or the IGP, DGP in that particular state. So basically, the author goes on to say, in order to prevent this, the state government now has to make the appointment from a panel of names that has been approved by the Union Public Service Commission. So thanks to Supreme Court of India, because of this, appointments are now happening on merit, says the author. Looking at all of these issues, what would happen? People would stop trusting the police officers. This is where the author goes on to say that India needs a police force that is responsive and respected, and the one need not be feared, says the author. Now, if we go back to the history, there are two important systems of policing. One is what is called as the London policing system. Kindly remember, this is very important. And the other is what is called as the Irish constabulary system. What is this London policing system? Basically, this was a policing system that was adopted by the British where in England, which means this has a simple motto, that is, the police will work with the people. So police is public, public is police. So what they have is the cooperation with the general public. Then there is the Irish constabulary system. Where was this Irish constabulary system introduced? This was introduced by the British in most of the colonial lands. So they did come to India, they did start ruling as well in the colonial lands that they started administrating in such positions. They used the Irish constabulary system. What is the motto of this Irish constabulary system? The motto is to work over the people, induce fear in the people, thereby come back and respect the police officers, is the concept of Irish constabulary system. So what should be the ideal one? The author says ideally we should have the London policing system, which is where the police will directly coordinate with the public, respect the public, and fear should not be the whole basis, says the author. Initially, when the Britishers introduced such a system, it was called as Irish constabulary system, which basically works on the fear. So the author in this particular case says that when it comes to the laws of the land, when it comes to the police reforms, what we require is that these police officers will have to be responsive and respected like in the London policing system, and not be feared like in the Irish constabulary system. That is where we have to remember some of the principles of policing as given by Sir Robert Peel. What are these principles? There are about 9 principles which should be adapted by the police in India. What is it? Their main motive is to prevent crime and disorder. They should seek the public approval of the police actions. They should be willing to cooperate with the public. The degree of cooperation of the public should be secured and should not be diminishing over a period of time. They should not be using more of physical force, and when it comes to the implementation of the law, they should constantly demonstrate absolute impartial service to the law. They have to use physical force only when they have to use it to restore order, and in exceptional cases, police at all times should maintain a relationship with public that gives reality to the historic tradition that police are the public and the public are the police. Principle 8 says that they should never appear to usurp the powers of the judiciary, and principle 9 says the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with it. So basically, if such a system is adopted in India, we would be able to bring massive reforms in the system. Added to this, the author also goes on to say we have been able to provide different types of training in spite of the educational record as well. There have been instances of bribe, corruption, extortion, sexual harassment, so on and so forth. So we have to bring reforms in the way that the IPS trainees are trained, says the author. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the crisis in Afghanistan. There are about 5 articles in the Hindu today. Let's take them all together and discuss as one single issue. The article initially makes a mention of Northern Alliance. What is this Northern Alliance? This is an alliance of multiple parties. National Resistance Front, where is it based? It is based in Panjshir Valley. So kindly remember, Panjshir is one of the regions. It is the Valley of Five Lions. It is located north of the Kabul, where in the Hindu Kush region as shown in the picture. And back in the 1990s, there was a resistance movement against the Taliban. So initially, this particular region where people came up together, different ethnic group came up together, they started moving against the Taliban. So this is nothing but a resistance movement that was present in the Panjshir Valley back in the year 1990. Apart from going against the Taliban, this particular resistance movement also was against the Soviet Union as well. So this happens to be a section of people where located in the Panjshir Valley, and these sections of the people went against the Soviets as well as the Taliban back in the year 1990. In the present situation, the valley is once again present into the news. Why? Because Taliban has captured most of the regions, Kabul and in and around the cities as well. One it is not able to capture as of now happens to be the Panjshir Valley. So the valley is the epicenter of what is called as the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, and now there are plans that these people could work together and prevent the Taliban in the present situation as well. When we look into this particular region, there are more than 1 lakh people in this region, and most of the people in this region are from the ethnic community of Tajiks. What is the significance of this particular Northern Alliance? In the past, they have come together, they have gone against this particular Taliban regime as well, and now there are signs that it may also go against the Taliban. That happens to be the significant factor, but there are challenges as well. Back in the 1990s, this particular group was backed by Iran, it was backed by India, so they were a strong group. But now the question is, which are the parties who would be backing the Northern Alliance? That happens to be the major challenge, and we have to wait and watch who will do what in this particular scenario. Further, the article also makes a mention about East Turkestan Islamic Movement. What is it? It happens to be a Uyghur extremist organization. Where is it present? It is present on the western part of China. So what has China said here? It has said that it want to conduct negotiations, deliberations and discussions with Taliban on a fixed criteria. The Taliban does not have any connection with this particular organization. This particular organization has carried attacks in the western part of China. So it has said that China would recognize and it would want to speak to Taliban only on a condition the Taliban does not interact with this particular organization. Apart from this, we've also had US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who are also ready to hold a G7 meeting as well virtually, and they also have plans to come up with protocols and measures to overcome this grave crisis that is unfolding in Afghanistan. This is all we have to understand, because we would have one of the videos which would be explained as part of the explained sessions. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Denial of access to credible data not only weakens governance, it also denies the citizens of basic right to hold the government accountable. In the light of the statement, examine the importance of data in policy making. India requires a police force that is responsive and respected, and not one that is feared. Discuss the need for reforms and suggest measures. So please write all your answers on the comment section by visiting our Byju's IAS website. We have created a platform for you where you have to go to the link, upload the image, have the peer review, come up with suitable feedbacks to your friends, so that all of us can clear this examination. So please go on to the website and write as many answers as possible. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.